Hey everyone, this is Yarrow, and you're listening to the DIY Small Business Podcast. I'm thinking about you extra much in these really difficult and uncertain times, and if I'm really honest, I really don't know what to say. I'm in grief and shock and deep uncertainty, and I'm also really committed to keep podcasting because I think it would be good to keep having good conversations and maintain a sense of being connected and being in dialogue and hearing about awesome stories and ideas and approaches. And so I'm really committed to send more podcast episodes out. I've been slowing down a little bit over the last 2 weeks, but I'm back and really excited. I've spoken to beautiful people, and today I'm sharing a conversation with Kate of Wanderwell Consulting, which was really beautiful. I just listened back to it and uploaded it, and I was just full of gratitude for being connected to Kate and knowing more about her work. We talked about creating a solid financial foundation for small businesses, about being okay with not being employable, which is really close to my heart. We also talked about really being led by our values and what that means in practice, and about meeting business partners and customers and clients with empathy, and also about building resilient local networks. That's something that I haven't done so much of yet, but actually really would like to do here in Scotland. So if that's on your mind and your heart, then I really hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Also, a quick announcement, I will be offering a free workshop this coming Saturday at 6 p.m. UK time, in which I will share tools and approaches for taking your business online and working with the uncertainty of the times ahead. And I think, I'm doing that because I know many of us are really anxious about how things will play out, what it will mean that we are in a global pandemic. And also the reality is that many of us will be in lockdown and some kind of self-isolation or social distancing for a while to come. And I would like to create some space for us to talk about what that means for our businesses and what we can do to connect with people online and possibly work from home and make that as smooth and sustainable as possible. So I will share both technical tools and explain how they work, and I will also answer questions and just share some resources that I find really useful. And there will be plenty of time just to connect and ask questions as well. So I would love to see you there, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. And for now, just thank you so much for listening. Let me know what you want to hear more about, and I'm sending so much love your way. Hello, everyone. I am really excited to bring you another interview conversation. As you know, I've been just super lucky this year with the kinds of people that have said yes to being interviewed. So today is no different. I'm speaking to Kate Strathmann. I hope I got this right, of Wanderwell Consulting, about values in business, what it means to build one. It's really interesting work that she's doing in local economies, and I'm just super excited to get to dive a little bit deeper. Kate, thank you so much for making time and being here.
My pleasure. I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, me too. So I want to start by asking where you live and what nature is like around here. I always like to be able to imagine kind of how this conversation is coming to be.
Yeah. So I live in Philadelphia on the East Coast of the United States. And today I'm chatting with you from my office, which is smack dab in the center of the city. So we don't have a lot of, I have a nice wall of office plants in the window, but otherwise our office is more or less equidistant from the two rivers that run through Philadelphia and kind of frame out Center City, but I can see a couple of historic brick walls out my window and some sunshine, and I couldn't tell you where the nearest tree is. So there's not a lot of nature, but there's a lot of urbanness.
Yeah, and you've got great art around you that I can see and listeners can't, but yeah. Thank you. Cool. Well, I would also love to know a little bit more about yourself and your business and how that came to be. Tell us anything you'd like to share.
Sure. So I am an artist first, probably, and multidisciplinary business owner, queer woman, rabble rouser on occasion. And I think my path to business has been, like many of us, completely winding and non-traditional and all over the place. And I think particularly as someone that works with financials frequently and as a foundational element of our work and my business, Wanderwell. So, my degree is in art, and I think that's really the core of my being. And how I approach my business primarily. However, and the origin story is somewhat accidental. I met my former business partner in a coffee shop in South Philadelphia. We co-worked there frequently at the time, about 7 years ago, maybe now, and started working on projects together with local businesses in Philadelphia. And they have a MBA hard finance background. And so it was really kind of a marriage of our skill sets and built from there. And so, where we are today is sort of a continuous evolution of that beginning work of really working on business planning and strategy with folks. And I think we've, have expanded over the years, and myself now as the sole director of the business, I think it's really grounded in a kind of multidisciplinary vision of what a business can be and what it can do and what kind of economies it can engage with and how we can affect change through that. I didn't really say anything about what we do yet, but
you have great ideas. That's the main thing.
But those ideas come through. So, we're primarily a consulting company, which is the driest way of putting it, and work on strategy, finance, and all the foundational elements of business, as well as providing bookkeeping services for small businesses. So we have a really solid financial foundation to what we do, to then be able to ask people questions about their dreams and hopes and wild fantasies, but be able to really ground it in some reality and data.
Cool. That is so needed. I feel like there's a lot of air element all around us when we are in the beginning and we're like, oh, I have this idea and it's so dreamy and beautiful. And then there's kind of the first wave of imposter syndrome to work through, and grounding often gets left out in that phase, I think. And so, I'm really excited that you're doing this work, and I can imagine that it's super valuable and supportive for lots of dreams that have come to be. Yeah.
And they don't teach it anywhere. I think is the other thing that's been my biggest realization is, like, you can go get an MBA, but most programs actually don't teach you how to run a small business. So it's not, you can learn Excel really well. But in terms of, like, actually understanding how business finance works and stuff like that, they're not in a lot of spaces to find that knowledge.
Yeah, that's so true. I would love to know what made you start a business in the first place. Did you ever intentionally walk away from an arts practice, or did it just kind of fall into your lap? How did it happen?
I think it kind of fell into my lap. I've been always pretty clear that I did not want to make my living primarily from art. That felt stressful. It's very hard to do. And so even in school, that was something I always felt very clear on. I had one full-time job in my early 20s. And I left that and moved to India and was in and out of India for a couple of years. So, I think a lot of it came from being really clear that I like to joke that I'm not super employable. I definitely am better in an owner seat or a visionary seat or a leadership seat. I have a hard time not interjecting my opinions on things, as I think a lot of us do. That might be the Aries rising. But So I think a lot of it came from, like, especially in my 20s, I was piecing together work, and I did some web development, and I did some marketing stuff, and, was all over the place. And so this body of work and, like, current business, I think came about by accident, really. And, kind of falling into projects that I just got really super into, like the strategy and the systems that underpin what we're trying to do in our businesses, especially in small creative spaces. And it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so interesting that you've done web development work as well. I think that's always such a unique way of looking behind the scenes of businesses. I think that I'm learning a lot about strategy and visions by kind of like having that sideway view into something. Yeah. So
it's kind of like a home or container.
Yeah.
That actually holds more than it appears. Sometimes.
Yeah. I would love to know a little bit more about your business values and how they're related to the political ideas that you hold dear.
Yeah. So I think, one of our values is inquisitiveness. And, that relates to, I think, a bit about what I was saying as being an artist first, in that one of the ways I think about artists and the role of artists is that, we ask deep questions that maybe do not have answers. And maybe that's a good thing. And so I think there's a piece of it that's related to that. And then I think the sort of political part of it, and what's grounded in, I would say, the engagement with a critique of the system that we're in. Like, we are living under capitalism generally in the Western world. And at the same time, I think the inquisitiveness value for me is a way of saying that we're going to test assumptions. And we're going to ask the questions of, like, why do we think this way? Or why do we assume, that this is the right way that we're supposed to be engaging in the system? Or these are the kind of beliefs that come up. One of the sort of like common phrases that gets thrown out there a lot, especially I think in like online business world, is charge what you're worth. And that's one that's like feels so loaded to me because it's like, well, if you're not part of dominant culture, like if you don't hold that, place of positional privilege, that can be so fraught with mixed messages. Like, as women, as people of color, we are being paid less on the dollar than white men. Like, there's hard data about that. So it's like worth, there's mixed messages, I think, about worth, and that, like, those kind of pricing, how do we position ourselves in the marketplace, like those can actually be really hugely politically fraught topics and choices to engage with. And so, I think at the root, this value of inquisitiveness is really just about asking these questions and knowing that we're not going to be impeccable in our integrity about it, because it's not possible. Like, we will replicate harm even as we, like, I know that I do that too. And I'm replicating harm in the system that I'm trying to unpack and critique, but at least to challenge the assumptions and questions. That's kind of the biggest one. And then I think the second value that's really important is empathy. And just really being attuned to where people are coming from. And knowing that business is really hard. Running a business is just inherently super challenging. I think it's all the more so when you're, trying to do that in a values led way,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way that takes care
Yeah.
of community, of yourself, of all those things. And so I think a lot of it is like, and this I think is also inherently political, of like just being really having a recognition of everybody's full humanity and the challenges we're all up against, and
Mm.
trying to pay the rent at all. On a basic level.
Yeah, totally. That's so important. I think you're right. Those are really beautiful values. You also talked a little bit about hyperlocal economies, and I would love to hear more about what they mean to you, or and maybe we can just start by kind of untangle a bit what exactly you mean. I can imagine that not everyone has a super clear idea about this.
Yeah, I feel like you have a lot to say about this too. So I'm going to ask you a question about how it back. Yeah, I think so. I think about local economies, particularly in the context of Wanderwell, in that, we have clients and we work with folks all over the United States. However, we are deeply grounded in the Philadelphia community and economy, and most of our clients are here. And um, that was really intentional from the beginning. Like most of my team is remote. We sort of work as an online business, but I do not consider us an online business.
Mm-hmm.
Like I consider us a community-driven business that's really rooted in our location. Even though I have employees that do not live in the state or the city. And a lot of it, I think, for me is about building an ecosystem, and looking at an economy as an ecosystem, and as a way to build interdependency amongst businesses, that I think can be really healthy. And as often I see something that's overlooked in sort of the economic system of online businesses that's sort of
Mm-hmm.
arisen in the last 10 years, maybe, or so, is I see sometimes people forget that they can work with people around them,
Yes.
which I understand, because you're like in your office, in your house. You're like, oh, I don't have to leave. How wonderful. And then sometimes people forget that might be actually the easiest path to
Mm-hmm.
both create business and growth, and also connect with people. So that's one answer. Um, we do a lot of cooperative development work in some partnerships with other folks in the city of Philadelphia, and that really is super grounded in creating local economies of cooperation. So one of the principles of co-ops is that there is sort of an open source ethos of sharing knowledge and working with other co-ops, and like really leaning into interdependence as a model. So that's another piece of the work we do, really recognizing like brick and mortar and people's neighborhoods as
Mm-hmm.
economies, and membership, and when folks like in cooperatives are either worker owners, in which the folks producing whatever is sold own the business, or they're member co-ops, like food co-ops, where the local users of that business
Mm-hmm.
are the owners. And so that's a really like elegant example of something
Mm-hmm.
that is generally hyper local, although there's certainly larger co-ops now too. Uh,
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
but I think I'm curious, because I live in a big city.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways, like uh, one of the conversations I have is like building a business based on mostly local clients
Mm-hmm.
uh, can be very robust
Mm-hmm.
when you live in a large city. And I know
Mm-hmm.
you live in a small
Village.
place, but is something that you've been looking at. Is it okay
Yeah.
if I ask you
Oh
about that?
yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally, yeah. That's really interesting for me at the moment because I have lived in so many different places since starting my business. So I am in my fifth year now, and I have spent most of my 20s in Brighton, which isn't a huge city. I think it has like 500,000 inhabitants, but there's a big e-commerce and web design scene, if you will. But when I was living in Brighton, I really never connected with people. I never did much networking. I think in those years, I did like one local website and over years, which is really mind blowing in a way, you know. But
Yeah.
I think there were many reasons for that. One of the first ones was probably that when I started my business, I already hadn't been really feeling super committed to Brighton anymore. I knew I wasn't going to be there forever, and I didn't have, very specific plans, but I was pretty open. So I just kind of didn't really ground myself very much locally. And I think that is partly because Brighton is so expensive. It's very close to London, so it's comparable to anything that's commuting distance to New York or Manhattan, for example. And I lived in a tiny house, which was cool in the beginning, but then, it's just like one of those life experiences anyway. And then it also happens to be that most of my audience, both for the podcast and on social media, when I was still not on social media, and for my newsletter, is kind of spread across what we now call Northern America. And I think that's because I did a business training in the very beginning that was mainly folks from over the ocean. And they, like my first clients came out of that group, and then they started recommending me, which is super sweet. But it's really interesting how quickly that can snowball, how you can become known in air quotes or ground your business locally in areas that are so far from you just because that's your first few clients, and then they recommend you. And that there was no intention in that in the beginning. I was just glad to have any kind of work, and I liked those people, and it was really cool because they recommended me to similar folks, and I was like, this is amazing, just going to keep it going. But it also meant that I actually now know very few people in the UK who do similar work or have similar ideas in business. And I've now in the summer moved to Scotland, to a village, and feel really committed here. I have a lot of love and romantic energy for this part of Scotland, and I'm just still really every day waking up feeling super glad that I get to live here. And it is a super small village, but we have an ecology center that has a really cool community of small business owners, and I'm just kind of slowly getting to know people with a lot of gentleness. I think I don't want to kind of inject myself as like a business person. I think I want to make connections as a human first. So it's really like a super slow, really sweet process, but I love the kinds of businesses people have here, and really excited to learn more. And I also want to teach more locally. So I have an online program, which I really love. And I feel, interestingly, that even though that program and that community isn't local, it does feel very intimate because it's such a niche group of people with very similar ideas at very similar points in their business. So, and then we have a lot of live, meetups on Zoom. So there is a sense of intimacy, and I want to have that geographically local as well. And I'm excited for that. Yeah.
I feel like you brought up such a good point that reminded me of, I think one of the things I know about building locally is that it really is about connection in the relationship first, and not like making a hard sell, like showing up with your pamphlet and your, I don't know, folders and stuff. But and I think that's been one of the keys to how Wanderwell's developed and being really grounded here is that I'm interested in the relationships for the sake of the relationships and the connection, and just like being engaged with cool people and supporting their work, whether they're paying us or not, and kind of being part of that. And I think that's been genuinely important, just as myself and for my own personal fulfillment, but also there's this benefit of like, that's how a local economy gets created. Like it's because there's care, I think, embedded in those relationships.
Yeah. So stepping back a little bit and kind of like zooming out again, I would love to hear what your relationship to social media is like at the moment, and how it's been maybe changing over the years, if it has.
The first word that came to mind was fraught. But, I think I can honestly say it's not something I've ever really invested a lot of time in as a business owner. We have never had a very developed social media presence. It's definitely one of those like shoulds that hangs out back in my brain somewhere frequently. But, and this relates back to building through an ecosystem of relationships and also the kind of business that we do, which is at this point and has been, largely one-on-one and service-based. And so have not needed to build an audience. And so we have a very robust word of mouth network, and most of our business comes from referrals and like direct relationships and things like that. So in terms of like a marketing tool, it's not something that I've ever invested in. I think part of that's my personality is because I am an introvert, a people person for sure. And my strength is in building relationships and intimacy. So I think in some ways, like Facebook doesn't make sense. I'm like, I don't really understand.
Yeah.
So we have an Instagram account. Do I post on it often or strategically? Nope. And that's been okay so far. It's not something that's actually harmed the business at all. Most of what I do that works is actually our newsletter. And again, and this is totally because of who I am, it's posted on I write on an idiosyncratic schedule. Like if there's not a weekly rhythm, there never has been, but have a ton of engagement there, and people stop me on the street and like, talk to me about what they've read and stuff like that.
That's so cool.
That means a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of engagement that I'm personally interested in. That said, I am working on a book project, and like on the horizon in 2020 is going to have to be audience building in a broader sense, which frankly scares me. It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know how to do that. That I think is one of those like business moments that we all have where it's like, well, shit, I guess I'm gonna have to figure that one out. And figure out a way to do it that fits how I want to be engaged. Like I don't think I'm gonna download an online course and like follow that to figure it out. But yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Having kind of opted out of all of that for the entire career of the business so far.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm really excited to share that with my audience because I think it's really important for people to hear that there isn't just one way of marketing or building a network or finding your first clients. I think there's so many ways of doing this, and it's really important that we find a way that's kind of aligned with who we are and what we believe in and what feels good to us on a day-to-day basis. And I love that you're prioritizing word of mouth and your newsletter. I think word of mouth is often really overlooked, and sometimes it's really as simple as reminding people at the end of a project, saying like, hey, actually, like, what was that like for you? I'm really open to your feedback. And if you know anyone who might, use our services, then that would be so meaningful if you could let them know. And people are usually really open to that, but they do need to be reminded because it's not always common sense. So I think that's really cool. And I also love that you are spending energy on your newsletter. I think that's a more intimate way of connecting. And I always think if someone signs up for a newsletter, it's really such a big invitation to be allowed into someone's inbox, and I want to honor that. And I think that in the times where I've prioritized social media more, looking back through my MailerLite account now, I'm not always that proud of my newsletters because there were, one of many things that week. And I was really just having my hands in so many different pots. And that was just the way it was at the time. But I do feel like since I've left social media, I hope that my newsletters have become a little bit more exciting to read and a little bit more honest, and that I'm a bit more present with the writing and the sharing. And I think that's a really valid choice to make. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think the referral thing, there's two things well, maybe three things that we do that I think work really well. One is it's actually in our contracts. Like there's a mutual expectations section in the contracts that folks sign, and there's a piece of it that says something along the lines of like, we will shower you with gratitude for any referrals you send our way during the course or after our work together.
Yeah.
And then when we do follow up, like sort of feedback form testimonial type thing, there's a question that we ask that's who would you recommend our services to and why? And I think that really helps because it makes people think about it, and it just triggers like that sort of, oh, right. And then the third thing is to build relationships with co-practitioners. So, part of our business is bookkeeping. There's a bunch of accountants that are similarly aligned, and I know I respect their work, because everybody's always trying to find a good accountant too here, and they'll send us clients all the time.
Yeah, that's so cool. Awesome. This is a really big question, so you can take this anywhere you like, and I really don't expect a perfect answer. But I wonder, in a perfect world, like what would you like to see and how we trade with each other?
That is a big question.
I
know. I think in a perfect world, I would like to see, and this is something I try and experiment with myself, of just having a lot of options for how to make it work. I think one of the things that I'm always thinking about is that doing the right thing is really expensive. Like there's a really clear path for being like a shitty employer and having poor labor practices and using like really cheap, shitty quality materials and all of that stuff. And like that will create a more robust bottom line. Paying people well is expensive. In the US, our healthcare system is completely batshit broken. And it's not feasible really for small employers to be the ones that are supporting their team's healthcare. It's really hard to do. And so, I think having space to experiment is one of the important things to me. Like I do barter when the circumstances are right as a way to open up work to folks that can't afford it, or it doesn't make sense to be investing in support at the moment. But I recognize I only can do that because, it's balanced by something else. Like we do have to bring in revenue. And so I think that's like, that is not my wildest dream, maybe, if I really sat here and thought about it for a while, but like as one answer is to be able to open up the space of what's possible in terms of how we exchange. But recognize that like, and I think this is something that I really strongly believe is that like we do have to have profit in our businesses. We do have to be able to pay ourselves well, like, as much as we can, and like work on those things like we can. We have to have a basis of financial viability, to put a wonky term on it, but but what that does is opens up space for more experimentation and like sliding scale and barter, and like I think some other means of how we can be in exchange together. I get needs met. I mean, it's really like That's the root of it.
Pretty basic stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
I think that was a great answer. Thank you so much. I would love to hear a little bit more, and that could be like on a practical or an emotional or a visionary level. It's like, what kind of services are you offering to small businesses?
Yeah, so our two core offerings are strategic consulting. So we do one-on-one engagements with folks that are looking at things like the money, how does the money flow through the business, growth, how to build out a team, hire, how to not lose your mind as a business owner, and
Oh, yeah.
a lot of the so we work on the strategic and foundational elements
Hmm.
of a business. So how does the design and the structure support the vision, and what are the components of that? How do they fit together? Um, and then we also offer bookkeeping on an ongoing basis. So and often integrate the two.
Hmm.
So getting a P&L every month is one half of financial stewardship, and then knowing what to do with it is the other. So we help folks with both. Um, and it's hard to find good bookkeepers in the world, unfortunately. So I think it is a really important aspect of, and necessary to running a business in this day and age.
Hmm.
So those are two core things. And then I've been getting into this work as I'm able, and it'll be a bigger piece of what we're doing in next year. But I do teach as well from time to time, and did the first iteration of a business finance for anti-capitalists workshop this year,
Hmm.
which was super fun. I did it in the cooperative community here. But next year I'm going to be revisiting that curriculum and doing more iterations of it, and doing it online so it's accessible to more folks. So that I'm excited about, and really just getting that foundational information we were talking about sort of at the beginning around the money piece, but from a place that offers a capitalist critique
Hmm.
and is privilege aware and class aware, and all of those things, which I think are really important to do both at the same
Hmm.
time.
Yes, totally. One of my last questions is, what do you wish more people knew when they're starting out?
Mm, um, I think that there's that it's all an experiment.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the most important things to just keep holding, you know, throughout the process, even when you are further along,
Hmm.
um, is that change and failure, and I think putting things to bed and having grieving processes
Mm.
of the stuff that's no longer serving you. That all of those things are really important, because it's an active learning process. Like, I think even I look back like a year ago, and there's stuff that I think I knew perhaps intellectually.
Hmm.
Um, and that's one of the things I think particularly happens when you're a person that works on other people's businesses all the time. Like,
Hmm.
I have a lot of expertise and knowledge about a lot of things about what works and what doesn't. And Wanderwell is also an active incubator of all of those ideas and practices. And I also get it wrong all the time. There's things that I understand intellectually, and then at some point I will stumble upon and be like, oh, right.
Hmm.
If I were consulting for myself, I would have figured this out 3 years ago. And I think that's so part of it.
Mm. Yeah, totally. I love what you said about putting things to bed and like good grief practices, because I think like some experience of challenge or failure is so inevitable. And if we really kind of honor that process and are really intentional with its ending,
Yeah.
then that is making it so much easier for us to move forward and not do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe do it again. I mean, I feel like there's stuff that I'm like, oh shit, yeah, that thing again. Whoops. Okay.
Yeah. Totally. I hear you on that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to share? And please tell us where people can find you.
Yeah. So our website's wanderwellconsulting.com.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best way to stay in touch is not on social media. I probably shouldn't say that actually, since I should probably post there more next year. But there's a newsletter sign up, and that's generally where I put most of my energy,
Mm-hmm.
and where things like the anti-capitalist business finance work will get gets worked out, and
Mm-hmm.
workshops will be posted first and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so that's where to find us. And I tend to try to be generous with my time, so I'm always happy to talk to folks about these ideas or their businesses and see where it goes from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really, really excited for your book as well. That won't be out when this episode is coming out, but maybe you'll
No.
come again. God, I saw like a flash of panic across your faces.
It's like, oh God.
No. I was gonna say I am just very excited whenever you're ready. I'm ready to read it. And
Yes.
and maybe you want to come again and talk about it when it's out. I would love to help you promote it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
I have residencies planned for next year,
Good.
so there are containers for this work already.
Amazing. It's all happening. Thank you so much for your time and energy and for your beautiful thoughts, Kate. I'm
Yeah,
very excited to share this. Thank you.
thank you. It's been a pleasure.